Hello, everybody. Thank you for being here. My name is Mariana Pascual, and I am very happy to be here in this Hedra conference on health crisis and education in the time of COVID-19. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers of this conference, and I would also like to express my heartfelt sympathy to all of you who have suffered emotionally or physically during this terrible time of COVID-19. My presentation today is called From Fear to Violence, Analysis of Media Texts from Argentina and Chile in the COVID-19 crisis. Let me tell you how we are going to organize this talk. First of all, I'm going to make a very brief reference to who I am, who we are, and what we do. Then I'm going to refer to the objectives of the presentation and the motivations for the study. Very briefly, I'm going to mention some of the previous studies that have been conducted specifically on this topic. The texts, the corpus that we analyzed and how we analyzed them. Then I'm going to share with you the results of the analysis and finally some conclusions. Yes. So let's begin by saying, by sharing with you who we are. Though I was born and raised and started my work, my research in Argentina, I moved to Chile some years ago, and I have conducted my research in the Pontificia Universidad Católica de Chile. And this work that I am presented today in particular is conducted in the context of a project that has been funded by Fondesit, which is our agency, our national funding agency. The name of the project is Discourse and Health, the discourse construction of pain in patients with chronic diseases. So as you can see, I have always been interested in health, the relation between health and discourse, and particularly the idea that pain is a very, very personal, intimate, and individual experience that can be either physical or emotional, and which can be very difficult to express in words. So the connection between health and discourse is a very close one, and there's a great deal of literature that shows that there are consequences. There are very clear, tangible consequences on people's quality of life if the quality of the linguistic processes that are used in the communication of the health and of the pain experience is improved. Yes. So let me refer to why I decided to focus on this. When the pandemic started, I started to watching the news, just like most of us did, and there was some systematic reference to acts of violence and aggression in the media. Yes, so I found it very difficult to understand, in particular, why people would start to become aggressive towards the health personnel. So my my initial question that triggered this study was, what are the possible causes of violence, particularly in healthcare settings? And then, to understand the possible causes of violence, I had to look at how they are represented in a particular type of discourse, which is media discourse. So I established this general objective, which was to examine how violence against health professionals in times of COVID-19 pandemic is construed in media discourse by analyzing news articles that were published in Argentinian and Chilean digital media. So when we talk about causes of violence, there are, of course, several, and many a times they are presented simultaneously, they are combined, and it is very rare to find one single cause triggering a violent action. So here I'm going to base my claims on the causes of violence that have been proposed by Murueta and Guzmán, who claim that not only social but individual acts of violence usually result from one or more of the following causes. The first one that they mention is being subjected to previous violence, especially during childhood. This is a common knowledge already in science that violence in childhood triggers violence. Also, frustration, failure, or prolonged and prevailing stagnation. This is also the cases of those people who all of a sudden become violent, but it's not out of the blue. It is the result of long processes of frustration or failure. Also, violence can result from pressure and the idea that you have no options, that your situation is so terrible that you have no other thing to do but to become violent. The fourth cause that they mention is prolonged emotional abandonment. Yes, you can clearly see that there are connections between one and another, and that many a times they are interconnected. Number 5 is overcrowding. We now can clearly know that overcrowding is a reason for violence. And overcrowding and or prolonged routine daily life. People get really tired of their routine, of their daily monotony, doing the same every day. And sometimes they become violent. Intelligence or limited cultural training can also lead to violence. Great immediate benefits, usually monetary financial benefits for exercising a violent action. Availability of forces, money, and or weapons, which give you the power to do, and the perception of vulnerability. Yes. Number 9 has to do with low intensity or low foreseeable probability of unpleasant or adverse consequences of a violent action. This is what we refer to as impunity. If you have that idea, that perception of impunity, you are more likely to conduct an act of violence. And last, but definitely not least, the idea of familiarity with violence and the idea of being immersed in a culture of violence. Well, as you can see, these causes are not enough. You may have a cause, we may all share some of these causes, but there is something that determines a turning from the notion of the cause of violence to the actual conducting the violent act, to actually becoming aggressive. Yes? And what is it that determines that change in behavior from an abstract idea to a real action? Well, that idea is the capacity to rationalize and to become aware of the possibilities and the possible consequences that you will have to face if you take actions. Well, in reference to the role of health professionals in culture, this has been studied for a long time, and there is something about doctors, about nurses, about health professionals in general that gives them something that is very, very relevant, and that is so consistently relevant in different cultures, which is the knowledge. Doctors, health professionals possess knowledge that allows them to heal, to save lives, to relieve pain, to give aid in moments when people are born, when babies come to the world, and in many other situations. So that knowledge has traditionally placed them in a position of social prestige. And this is very important because that social privilege, that social prestige is not something new. That has happened throughout history in many cultures. Yeah. So when somebody is in such a position of high prestige, there are clear expectations. Yeah. So much so that in some cultures, this healing capacity was attributed to a divine origin, or sometimes, like in cases of several tribes in different parts of the world, there was a common belief that the healing capacity was inherited from a member of the family, and I was passed on from generation to generation. In any case, the social role that they have played throughout history has always been of utmost importance. So, why is it that they are attacked? Is violence in healthcare settings a new phenomenon? Well, definitely it is not. This is not a new form of violence, but the fact that we are in the middle of a pandemic has brought this social phenomenon into light. There are several studies that confirm this occurrence, systematic occurrence of violence in healthcare settings. And a study from 2018, relatively new, has shown that 70% of nearly 25,000 workplace assaults occur annually in healthcare settings. But pay attention to this, only 30% of nurses and 26% of emergency department physicians have reported incidents of violence. Yes, the same happens with some other types of violence, and with violence in some other settings. But the point is that these incidents of violence are not reported. It's not that they do not happen, they are not reported for a variety of reasons. So what did we do? We collected texts from news media, digital media, that were published, here you have the dates, in the months of April and May 2020. That was after the pandemic started. And 4 of them are from Argentina, and the rest, the 3 other texts that we analyzed, are from Chile. Here you have the headlines that correspond to those texts. The first one says in the headline, in the middle of the quarantine, massive doctor protest in Cordoba, which is a city in Argentina. We are not heroes or murderers. This is a direct quote from a doctor. Stop the aggressions. Another one, coronavirus in Argentina denounces before the justice for violence to doctors. Then coronavirus and harassment, violence against infected persons and health professionals. Then we have a question, doctors and nurses, why do we see them as enemies? And this is interesting because we already know from the questions that we see them as enemies. Quite a strong claim. Then Zúñiga, who is a Chilean health officer, he criticizes new episodes of discrimination against health personnel. And again, a direct quote, it is these people who are going to take care of us. So there's a call for peace. A month of pandemic, 286 health workers have been infected with COVID-19, which was an incredibly high number due to the fact that this is only April. The last one makes reference to something that happened in Mexico, but this piece of information was recovered by the Chilean media. And again, we can see that there is a voice that has been introduced in this discourse. They threw hot coffee down my back and yelled, infected. The increase in attacks in Mexico against medical personnel fighting the coronavirus. Yes, you can see that they all refer to the topic and their analysis. This is for you to have an idea of what they look like. They are all in the digital media, and they are very, very popular digital media in the country. So they cover a very, very broad audience. So let's take a look at how we conducted the study. There are 3 main steps in the methodology. First of all, we conducted a sentiment analysis using NVivo, which is a software for qualitative data analysis. We used the latest version, 2020, for polarity detection. That is to say, whether the evaluations that were constructed in the text were positive or negative. And there are 4 levels of polarity, or 4 types of values that are associated through the analysis. The values are highly negative, moderately positive, and highly positive. After that, we corroborated, or we ratified the results with the manual identification of the evaluation instances. We focused on the values that encode, that express evaluation. And in the last step of the methodology, we identified the evaluative instances and we related them to the entities that were evaluated. Yes, this is following Hood's proposal from 2010. Yes, so we have the evaluation and we also have now the entities that were being evaluated in the text. So let's refer to the first results of the analysis, which were the implementation of the software. As you can see in this figure, sentiment analysis from in vivo showed that under the category very negative, there were only 4 instances, which is a very low number, fortunately. In the other extreme, we have very positive, and the number is also very low. In between, we have moderately negative, with a very high number, 85, and moderately positive with 25 instances. What is this telling us? This is telling us that news media, even if they're talking about violence against health professionals, do not usually focus on very intense values, on very intense negative evaluations, or very positive ones. That they have a tendency to focus on medium values, those that are more moderate. In this case, in the case of the topic that we are looking into, the value that attracts the largest number of evaluation are moderately negative, as could be expected. Let me show you some examples of a highly negative instance that was detected. It is from an Argentinian media. It's a reference to the Bible. You know that from the Bible, you can take an enormous variety, but they chose, the reporter, the journalist who wrote this article, chose to analyze Leviticus, and he quoted this idea of being filthy, and compared the pandemic situation to situations of leper. Yes. In Leviticus, those who suffer it are called filthy, and their public humiliation is ordered. And the leper on whom there is a sore will wear torn clothes, and his head uncovered and clothed he must proclaim, I am filthy. It is the presence of such a strong lexical item that determined its categorization as highly negative. Then there were some, let me show you an example of a moderately negative instance. In the current critical situation, the uncertainty in the face of the absurd and complex seeks to be resolved with certainties. Many of these false. So we have negative values such as uncertainty, absurd, and complex, but they are not as extreme as the one that we saw in the previous slide. Moderately positive. The example taken from a Chilean digital newspaper says, I am going to reassure you with my experience, convey to you that there is hope, that this virus can be fought. Even you can see the use of the metaphor, which is highly, highly frequent in discourses of health. because it seemed to me that it was the best way to raise awareness about what was happening. You can clearly see a reference to many positive values, but they are moderately positive. If you compare them to the highly positive one that we can see in the next example. And while he's grateful for the surveillance police patrols around hospitals and the medical personnel are now allowed to go to work without a uniform so as not to expose themselves to more attacks, he makes it very clear that he does not intend to leave his work. Yes, so there's a general positive tone in the evaluation. Here you have the idea of being grateful, the idea of surveillance, not to expose yourself to prevent attacks. Yes, the attacks are associated with a negative polarity, making it very clear that he does not intend to leave his work, and that is a very good indication. Yes. So after we conducted the first type of analysis, what we did was to establish a relationship between the digital analysis and the manual labeling that we had conducted. And we saw that there was a very, very high correlation between the in vivo results and the manual results. Then we identified the entities and we saw the following. 6 different categories. The first one are most clearly represented, health and disease, with several examples, of course, health personnel, then actions and feelings that result from the pandemic, social values of several types, both positive and negative, and some other related social actors that were related to individuals in functional representation following Van Leeuwen's category of social action. There was one element which was transversal and it was considered to be relevant in all texts, and that is the factor of time. That is the element of time, which is a value that is represented in all texts in our corpus. And it is also a value which is of particular importance in health communication discourses. So, some references regarding the media. There is a permanent movement from the individual to the collective, which has to do with the dual purpose of the text. On the one hand, we can talk about hard news, which has to do with high impact, high immediacy, tangible actions. Yes, accidents, natural disasters, that kind of news. That has to do, in this case, with an abrupt disruption suffered in the pandemic. But then we could also identify a social purpose, which is normally associated to the soft news, yes, to abstract senses of social responsibility, reflection, and they are the pieces of news that have to do with the construction and consolidation of social values. So, if we want to analyze conclusions on the causes of violence, we can clearly see that there are multiple factors, but that the following are the ones that are more likely to have caused the violence. Prolonged frustration, pressure because you have no options, overcrowding, problems with intelligence, and lack of cultural training. But the last 3 are the ones that I would like to emphasize. low probability of unpleasant consequence, the feeling of impunity, and the normalization of violence, they are factors that will determine who we are in the middle of a pandemic and beyond the situation of pandemic. And that is what we have to really, really be careful about and fight against. There are some references for you to consult, and I would like to thank you for sharing this presentation with me. And here you have your references. So thank you for being here.